It's the early morning hours of June 25th, 2005. 23-year-old Steven Cornejo is spending the evening with friends. After a night out celebrating a birthday, the group heads back to an apartment complex in Fairfax County, Virginia. It's late. People have been drinking. And outside the apartment building, a confrontation begins. What starts as a verbal exchange quickly turns physical. Within moments, a gun is drawn. By sunrise, Steven Cornejo is dead. The people who loved him expected answers. What they got instead was a fight that would last for decades. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Case Uncovered, where we uncover some of the most compelling and lesser-known true crime cases. I'm your host, Jen Rivera. Before we get started, I just want to say how good it feels to be back. Over the past several weeks, I've been focused on several projects and took some very much needed time to recharge. But I'm excited to share that, beginning in July, Case Uncovered will be returning to its regular weekly release schedule. I'm also excited to share that I'll be launching a brand new video series on my YouTube channel called Behind the Files. While Case Uncovered focuses on the stories themselves, Behind the Files will take you behind the scenes of this work. What it's really like working with families, researching cases, navigating the ethical challenges of true crime storytelling, and answering the questions that rarely get talked about in this space. It's also a chance for me to connect with all of you in a more personal and unscripted way. So if you've ever wondered what happens behind the microphone, behind the investigation, or behind the advocacy work, make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel so you don't miss it. My handle is Jen Rivera Investigates. Now, today's case takes us to Fairfax County, Virginia. For more than 20 years, Steven Cornejo's family has fought to make sure his story isn't forgotten. And while this episode explores the events surrounding Steven's death, it's also about the people left behind and their determination to continue seeking answers all these years later. This is the murder of Steven Cornejo. Before we talk about what happened on June 25th, 2005, I want to give you a better understanding of who Steven was. Because for his family, Steven isn't defined by the way his life ended. He's remembered for the life he lived and the person he was.
My name is Jessica Menjivar Fernandez, and I am actually Steven Cornejo's first cousin. So we come from a Hispanic Latino family. So as you know, our family all immigrated here at the same time. We grew up in Falls Church, Virginia. And although Steven was 5 years older than me or so, we had kind of like two age groups. We had the big kids who were like 7, 8 years older than us. And then we had the kids that were like our age. And Steven kind of fit in the middle of both of those.
Jessica and Steven grew up in a large, close-knit family in Falls Church, Virginia. Multiple generations shared a home together: aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins. And in a family that large, it would have been easy for someone Steven's age to spend all of his time with the older kids. But according to Jessica, that's not who he was.
So we all lived in the same house growing up. Steven lived outside of the home for a little bit, but eventually came to live in the house with a bunch of cousins, a bunch of aunts, uncles, our grandparents. Like we all lived in the same house in Falls Church for a long time. So Steven kind of fell in the middle of those two age groups, and he very much so made sure that he was part of those two age groups. So as much as he would go out with my sister and my cousins, and he played soccer and he was the cool guy at school, he also played with the younger cousins, and we would set up booby traps in the basement, and we would make haunted houses. We would make comedy shows, and we would present it to each other, and whoever was the funniest won. So he was always coming up with such creative, fun things to do. We loved playing board games together. That was another thing that he enjoyed. I don't know if you would like people knowing this, but he collected Pokemon cards until he was way too old. And he would get so excited when he would get like the shiny cards. I don't even know what they are.
Jessica discusses Steven being nurturing, protective, family oriented, and having an amazing heart. He was also a talented athlete. Steven played soccer and eventually became co captain of George Mason High School's state championship soccer team. But when Jessica talks about him, trophies and accomplishments aren't what she remembers the most. She remembers how he made people feel.
There were just different sides to Steven. He was a nurturing person. He was protective of his family. He was so family oriented. I feel like I could go on about him for a very long time, but he just had an amazing heart. And, he went through a lot as a child. And nonetheless, I still feel like he was such a great person.
In June of 2005, Steven was 23 years old. Like so many young adults, he was focused on work, friends, family, and whatever came next. No one knew how quickly everything was about to change. Just 4 days before he died, Steven attended Jessica's high school graduation. Like so many milestones before it, he showed up to support the people he loved. Neither Jessica nor anyone else in the family could have known it would have been one of the last memories they would ever share with him.
So Steven was definitely a person that would show up if to any family events, birthdays. I had just seen him 4 days prior at my high school graduation. So that was the last day that I was with him. But he passed away on June 25th, 2005. He was at a friend's birthday at Dave and Buster's that day. And I guess they decided to go to an apartment. I don't recall if it was someone that was at Dave and Buster's or they just went to their house afterwards. But they, took the party from there and then went to the apartment in Fairfax, Virginia. And were, doing what early 20-year-olds do.
As the evening continued, the group eventually made their way to an apartment complex in Fairfax County. At first, it was a typical night among friends. But sometime during the early morning hours, things began to unravel.
When Steven went to this party, he went with a girl who he was talking to, let's say, but it seems like, she got a little bit too intoxicated and he pulled her outside to talk to her. I don't know if they were arguing at the time, but they also had a third friend come out and try to calm down the situation. When all three of them were outside of this apartment, one of the neighbors came out and told them to be quiet. And I guess when that happened, the guy took the girl and they left. So Steven was kind of left there with this neighbor. It sounded like there were some verbal exchanges happening. This person ended up putting his hands on Steven's shoulder, which led them to have a physical altercation. As they were having the physical altercation, Steven was hit many times with the gun, according to his autopsy. And even when we saw him at the funeral, it was very clear that he was hit with something very hard on his head, on the top of his head, on his forehead, all over his body, even on his hands. Yeah, scratches on his elbows. And so they engaged in altercation.
Exactly what happened during those final moments would later become the subject of years of legal proceedings, conflicting testimony, and intense debate. But there's one fact that has never been disputed. A shot was fired.
The person who was in the physical altercation with Steven, he brought out a concealed gun. I believe they call it like a snake pellet gun. So he was hitting Steven with it, and eventually Steven was shot in the back.
When the chaos ended, Steven had been shot, and for the people who loved him, life would never be the same. As the sun came up that morning, Steven's family had no idea their lives were about to change forever.
I was very young at the time. Steven actually passed away on my 18th birthday. I was going to college. Like, I had a lot of things going on at the time. So the person who was heavily involved in the aftermath was my mom, Steven's dad, who was my mom's brother, and then their other brother. So they were doing a lot behind the scenes with the logistics, trying to figure out what happened. It almost felt like off the bat, the police was not necessarily on our side. We're a very close family, and it felt like almost immediately that they took the person who shot him's side. So, there were moments where my family was trying to find, they wouldn't give the name out of the person who shot Steven. For example, there were many times where we heard through the grapevines that they were asking if Steven was gang involved, which was 1,000% not true. Law enforcement never contacted Steven's dad. Steven was identified, his body was identified by some friends, and his dad had to hear that his only son at the time died through my cousin calling my uncle, who then called Steven's dad. It was just a lot of really strange things just kind of happening off the bat. It took a long time for my family to get the name of the person who shot him. It felt very strange.
In the hours and days that followed, the Cornejo family found themselves searching for answers while trying to process an unimaginable loss. What happened next would leave a lasting impact on how they viewed the investigation.
After Steven passed, his date of his funeral was the beginning of July, after all the autopsies and everything. It kind of started with some weird stuff that was happening even then. My mom had asked since no one in the family saw his body, she asked if they could come see him at the morgue, and they wouldn't let, my mom or his dad see him. And then when his funeral came around, my mom asked, "We would like to see the body, but please have it without makeup. Is that possible?" They say yes. So my family arrives there the day before the funeral, and he had already had all his makeup on, which was very strange. But nonetheless, it was clear Stephen had, bruises and cuts and lacerations all over him. Then in August of 2005 is when the lead detective of the case, presented the case to the grand jury. When he presented the case in the grand jury, they declined to bring criminal charges to the person who shot him.
Just weeks after Steven's death, the case was presented to a grand jury. No criminal charges were filed. For Steven's family, that decision marked the beginning of a years-long effort to understand why.
During that time, after that happened and no criminal charges were brought, that's when my family, was looking for attorneys because they would not provide the shooter's name. So they were getting an attorney. A lot of the attorneys would say that they would wanted to take the case and then would back out or just never return my family's phone calls. Eventually, my family would also have to hire a private investigator to get that individual's name so that they could file a civil suit. Even after, just kind of going back to when it was presented to the grand jury, the lead detective kind of told them that it was self-defense, that Steven was abusing the girl, although she presented with no marks, bruises. She has no recollection of the night, unfortunately, but, she declined that Steven had, abused her or hit her. The detective was definitely kind of trying to convince my family, like, he died, just kind of let it go type of thing. There's, nothing you can do pretty much. So eventually they found an attorney that was able to help us out. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit, and we went to court, I want to say in like March of 2006. Yeah. So maybe like a year and a half later.
For Steven's family, the grand jury's decision was devastating, but it wasn't the end of their fight. If the criminal justice system wasn't going to move forward, they would pursue another path: a civil lawsuit. Unlike a criminal case where prosecutors must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, civil cases operate under a different standard. The question isn't whether someone should go to prison, the question is whether they can be held legally responsible. And for the Cornejo family, that distinction mattered.
During that time, my family was awarded
$1.9 million.
Yeah. During that time, after the family won that, the shooter, he filed for bankruptcy. And so he never had to pay for anything that, he was held accountable for. I think after that, my family was very, very tired. I think we spent so much time and money trying to get justice for Steven, right? But it also feels like during that time, it's like we almost put a pause on our mourning. And I think we noticed, like, okay, they're not going to help us out. We felt very defeated, and everyone kind of moved on with their lives. His dad ended up getting remarried. He had 2 children after Steven passed away. I went to college, and everyone kind of just went their way, although we still had this trauma, this pain that my family always had on the inside. And it was very difficult to talk about, and it's still difficult to talk about even 20 years later. And with the injustice that we felt, it's made it that much harder.
The family eventually pursued a civil case, and while that process resulted in a significant verdict, it didn't provide the closure they had hoped for. Over time, life moved forward, but according to Jessica, the grief never truly disappeared, and neither did the questions. As years passed, Steven's family continued searching for answers, but they weren't the only ones, because there was someone else who couldn't stop thinking about what happened that morning: a journalist named Dave McKenna.
My name is Dave McKenna. I'm a writer in Washington, D.C. I know of Defector Media, a sports and culture website out of New York City. I grew up in Falls Church, Virginia. I was a sports writer in Washington, D.C. and Washington City paper in June of 2005 when the killing happened. And then I started following it. Steve was a kind of a celebrity. He was captain of the first team from George Mason High School to win a state championship soccer team. And he has some renown, and it never made sense to me. And the story, like anyone who looks into it, I believe would come away with the same thing. It makes no sense. The only options are for the police and prosecutors' conduct are incompetence, which is most likely, combined with racism, which is very evident, or a conspiracy to protect the shooter who was working for an intelligence. He was a Navy veteran working for an intelligence. The shooter was white. Stephen was an El Salvador immigrant at the time, but he was not. He was a child of El Salvador immigrants at a time when Fairfax County was going through an incredibly racist anti-El Salvadoran phase because of a workers' center that was being built in the Herndon section of the county. It was the hottest political issue. It had become a national topic. They called it the beachfront on right-wing Rush Limbaugh sort of radio. They called it Fairfax County the beachhead of the anti-immigration movement. They called it the immigration reform movement, but it was the most hateful thing I ever seen. I mean, and again, I'm old and I grew up in Virginia in the 60s. I know racism. I mean, now I've been just the observer end of it. But I had never seen anything like this when you could say anything like that. The people in the Washington Post and on the radio, they were calling the El Salvadorans to say they were spreading social diseases, leprosy, and like the most ridiculous. It was just open season, and it foreshadowed what the whole country is going through today. But I'd never been exposed to anything like that. And so like at the time when this happened, like it just never made sense, and it stuck with me and went away. They won the civil trial, the incompetence or whatever of the Fairfax County system. Mostly the police came out because these witnesses showed up at the civil trial who were completely ignored during the criminal procedure. Like, and you don't really need to know much about his case beyond an unarmed man was shot in the back, and the shooter was allowed to claim self-defense. Like, that doesn't happen. Have there been no witnesses, which the prosecutor kept claiming there's no witness, and then when witnesses show up, they say, oh, they lied.
At the time of Steven's death, Dave was working as a reporter for the Washington City paper. Steven's story wasn't just another assignment. It was a case that never quite made sense to him. And over the years, as more information surfaced, that feeling only grew stronger. But before we get into those efforts, it's important to understand the official position taken by prosecutors. 3 years after Steven's death, Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney Ray Morrow authored a 12-page letter explaining why criminal charges would not be pursued. In that letter, Morrow outlined what prosecutors believed happened that night. According to the Commonwealth's review, Steven had been drinking, an argument occurred, a physical confrontation followed, and the individual who shot Steven claimed he feared for his safety during the altercation. The letter ultimately concluded that prosecutors did not believe they could prove a criminal case beyond a reasonable doubt. For Steven's family, however, that explanation raised more questions than answers.
I emailed the former mayor of Falls Church, Robin Gardner, and she was someone who really advocated to the Commonwealth Attorney of Virginia to reopen Steven's case after they didn't prosecute for criminal charges. Then, she met with me and she had some connections, with a lawyer that she knew who actually told me that she had never taken a case of this magnitude and that it would be maybe more beneficial to get in contact with senators, congressmen, politicians. After that, Dave and I actually went in, I believe, September 2025. We went to the Commonwealth Attorney's office in Fairfax County at the courthouse. I had previously called and they basically told me like, oh, they won't take this case. So I was like, Dave, you want to come with me? I'm going to go to the court. And he was like, and I'm just going to ask in person. He was like, yeah, I'll come. So we met at the courthouse. We met a very nice gentleman who we didn't really explain the story to him just because, if they were to take the case, he didn't want all the information or receive all the information, but told us that our next step would be to go to the Fairfax County Police Department that resonated with where Steven passed. So we were like, hey, you got some time today? You want to go do that now? You want to go to the police department now? And Dave was like, yeah, let's go. So we went to the local police department. We waited a while to talk to someone, but we eventually were able to talk to a police officer who was taking information, and then she would take it to her supervisor. She would come back and ask us for more information, go back to her supervisor, and eventually after a couple hours, they told us that they were going to have a cold case call us. So after that meeting with them, I actually had cold case call me that night, and they wanted to set up a meeting. I set up the meeting for late September of 2025, and I met with the detective, and I presented the case to him, right? Kind of very factual things that happened during the altercation for when Steven died, what happened after the fact, things that were presented during the civil trial. It felt like things went really well. He, said he would get in contact with me during the winter break of 2025. He contacted me and said that, he wanted to set up another meeting. And during that meeting, he said that I would be presenting the case just like I did the first time, and that it would be to his partner and possibly like a supervisor. And so I was like, okay, great. That, means that the first meeting went really well. Wants to present it to his other staff members. So then in February 2026 is when we had that second meeting with Cold Case, and he's very prepared, as I did the first time. And he kind of cut me off. And he said that there was a 12-page letter that he needed to read to me. And I thought it was strange. I was like, okay. So I let him read the 12-page letter, and he kind of introduced it as being a letter that the Commonwealth attorney, or the assistant Commonwealth attorney at the time when Stephen died, Ray Murrow, he then became the Commonwealth attorney. The initial Commonwealth attorney, Robert Moran, retired. And then when we were trying to get criminal charges after the civil trial, he indicated that he was an independent reviewer, Ray Murrow, and that he had looked back into the case, and he had explained how Stephen was the aggressor, that he was severely intoxicated, that he basically made this person look like a hero in the letter, and that to a degree that Stephen caused his own death. And so as he's reading this, I completely disassociated. Like, I was like, wow, I know where this is going. It's where it's gone this entire time. And for some reason, I thought this time would be different. I just wanted to have that inkling of hope, and it wasn't.
Jessica says hearing the contents of that letter was one of the most difficult moments of her advocacy journey for Stephen, not only because of its conclusions, but because she felt it painted a version of Stephen that didn't reflect the man her family knew. And there were other concerns as well, questions about witness testimony, questions about physical evidence, and questions about actions taken after the shooting. According to Jessica, her family was later told that the individual who shot Stephen changed clothes, showered, washed the firearm, disposed of ammunition, and initially denied involvement before later speaking with investigators. Not only was this information told to the family, it was also presented in the 12-page letter and was noted as suspicious behavior.
He ripped up his shirt, flushed it down the toilet, he washed his shorts, took a shower, washed his hands, washed his gun, he flushed ammunition, he hid ammunition, and then when the police were canvassing, he initially lied that he didn't know anything about what had happened outside, and he turned himself in 3 hours later.
For the family, those details became difficult to reconcile with the official conclusions, and they weren't the only ones asking questions.
Steve's body told a story, and it came out. He wasn't allowed to tell it until the civil trial, where he has 5 gashes in his head, 3 in the back of his head, gashes where they cause subhematoma. I mean, they cause severe, and according to the alcohol, severe wounds below the skull, and on the 2 on the front, 3 in the back, and the shooter who was treated as the victim of this attack from Steve had no marks on him. You can see the pictures of him, no marks at all whatsoever. And their story, the day one story, the first time this was mentioned in the Washington Post was Tuesday. The murder was sunrise Saturday morning. The first time this was mentioned was following Tuesday, three days later. From an interview Monday, 2 days later, the first day, Robert Moran, prosecutor and the most powerful man in Virginia politics at the time. He had been in office for 37 years. He told the Washington Post, like he was asked by the Post, they linked the story together, like saying, is there a crime wave in Fairfax County this murder? And he right away said, I'm looking at self-defense of that. And everything he did from that point on was to defend his case that this was not a murder, this was a self-defense to justify violence. And none of the evidence ever supported it. It made no sense that this guy was about to shoot somebody in the back.
One witness, whose testimony would later become a significant point of discussion, reported seeing portions of the confrontation from close range. According to Dave, that witness's account differed from portions of the narrative that prosecutors ultimately relied upon. And for critics of the investigation, that discrepancy became one of several lingering concerns. For Dave, the issue was never about a single witness or a single piece of evidence. It was the larger picture, the unanswered questions, the investigative decisions, and the belief that important questions remained unresolved. For Dave, Steven's story had never completely left him either. It was a case that truly stayed with him. And Dave and I really connected when we were talking about the impact these stories and families have on us as professionals in this space, but also as humans who have empathy and deeply feel for these families. It was truly heartbreaking to hear how much Steven's story has impacted Dave as he fought back tears.
Like, you can't understand them sticking to the story when everything that came out, it's from the autopsy on, showed, you know what, this was murder. This was murder. It's a shot. You can't shoot a guy in the back and clean something. And even like, and another thing that, and this stuck with me, like when I we saw the message from Jessica, like oddly, like I am, and Jessica can attest to this, I am fucked up, if you can say that on your podcast, by the story. Because I could see up close the pain. And thought I had done this enough, but no, to see how close, like the pain it caused and the incompetence and just it's so maddening. Like, because the Fairfax County to this day, they denied every FOIA request I made. The police, the courts, everybody, 100% of my FOIA requests were denied. For police reports, the detective, they refer to things that don't exist, to like a 2005 interview with the witness who showed up at the civil trial to say, yeah, I saw it from 10 feet away. I saw him shooting in the back. The police say, oh, well, he changed his story. He didn't tell us that, on the night of the thing. And this report that they keep referring to, I keep making FOIA for, and it must not, either they're hiding it or it doesn't exist. They can be twisted. Every request has been denied, and including several where they say, like, they say, you didn't even, I go, where's my, where's this report? They go, you didn't request that. And I would cut and paste. Yes, here's my request for the June 2005 interview between Detective Schoenfer and witness, Mr. Amadeo. Well, where is it? You didn't even request that, like, even in response to cutting and pasting my request. And I'm going, what is going on here? It's hard to talk about it without I'm crazy, but like, I swear to God, anyone who looks into this will think something crazy is going on. And another thing, like for the story I did, I went crazy on this story. I talked to 100 people. Everyone hates me at work. I've spent way too much time with way too many words on it. But it's fascinating for all the wrong reasons that this system really does work like you always feared it did, but didn't want it to. Like the behavior of the legal system in this case is completely inexplicable. Like they spent all the only efforts after after that night, the only investigations they did were to demonize the dead guy. They did zero to back. And there's so much, that they could have done to if they wanted a conviction. There's so much there. They didn't want it. They worked 180 degrees in the other direction. How did this guy get away with this? And that's that's me. I go back and read my story. How the hell did this happen? And I have no answer. I still have no answer. Like the situation Jessica described with the treatment, even recently, by the cold case guy who was incredibly responsive right away. He called, and Jessica confirmed this. I think within an hour of us leaving the police station, he called up. And this is like, a courtesy that the family hadn't gotten in 20 years. Except for that day, the prosecutor's office guy was incredibly nice. And for him to, the stuff that he presented, like this 12-page letter, it's not part of the case. It's dated a week before the actual document that was sent to the mayor, which was 3 pages long. This is 12 pages. I don't even know what the hell it is. And they're saying they're basing the whole decision to not reopen the investigation on a 12-page document. It's kind of like Hitler's diaries. It's like, where the hell did this come from? Did this just come out of thin air now? It didn't exist, in 2005. So it's a head scratcher. What you said about, you know, that was the realization that doesn't make it easier to take, but the realization, that's what my wife, exactly what she said to me. She said, this is one in it. Yeah, this happens every day somewhere. So you don't, there's so much pain out there. And it's like with somebody, I might have been Jessica even who said this to me. I said, what's the moral? She said, when somebody dies, when somebody dies, you don't get over it.
I feel that, Dave. I do. And Jessica. And this just goes to show like how sad these cases are, because they affect you like this, and it's not even your family, it's not even your family, but you can feel it so deeply. To just imagine how the family's feeling and how you're feeling, Jessica, and your family. And this is why I do what I do, is because I know that this is a problem with a lot of these cases, and families getting treated terribly and not getting justice for the victims. And it's so hard because you try to do all the right things, right? And then when the police and the investigators are fighting against you, it makes it really difficult. But this is why it's important to get loud, because this is the best thing you can do. So what you guys are doing is the best thing that you can do. Get loud. Don't let Steven's name go away. You just keep it in their place all the time, because you never know. I mean, obviously there's no guarantee that that there will be justice, but you can always hope and pray that there will be. And you keep fighting. You never stop fighting. You keep bringing his name up. You keep talking about his story. Years after the original investigation, Jessica and her family submitted FOIA, or Freedom of Information Act, requests in an effort to obtain additional records related to Steven's case. Among the records Jessica eventually received was a copy of the 12-page letter she had heard about for years. While the letter itself wasn't new, this was the first time she had the opportunity to review it in its entirety and see firsthand the reasoning behind the decision not to pursue criminal charges.
Actually, the day that we recorded the first interview, I received the FOIA requests that we had asked for. There are still some things that seem like they're missing, and we're unsure why. The 12-page letter is in there. We're at the point where my family and I are very transparent, and we want to be transparent about what has happened, especially because that letter, outlined why they would not press criminal charges against this person after the civil trial. And although it was addressed to the mayor, in 2008, she only ever received 3 pages. But then when we met with Cold Case, there was 12. So it was interesting.
For Jessica, finally reading the letter didn't bring closure. Instead, it reinforced her determination to keep searching for answers. Over time, Jessica's definition of justice evolved. In the beginning, her focus was singular. She wanted accountability for Steven's death. But after 2 decades of fighting, grieving, and learning, her mission expanded. Today, she wants people to know who Steven really was. She wants other families to understand that they aren't alone. And she wants families facing similar circumstances to know that it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to advocate for your loved one. And it's okay to keep searching for answers, even years later.
My journey has taught me, like, in looking back in hindsight, oh, okay, I was experiencing PTSD. I couldn't say Steven's name. I couldn't drive. Where he passed away was right by the mall that we went to. I couldn't go to the mall anymore. I, was startled at loud noises, and, and reading books and going to school and learning more about mental health. I learned that I really had post-traumatic stress disorder. Even though I wasn't there, I didn't see him pass away, I would constantly picture it, or I would replay images of my dad telling me about how Steven had died. And I could tell you everything. I also like his funeral too. Now that I know about mental health, the whole dissociating part of it, when you go to a funeral that's so traumatic, and it almost feels like you're watching yourself in a movie, like it's not real. So I think putting a name to things that I had gone through after learning more about mental health and how it impacts your brain was really helpful for my healing process as well. I feel like when it comes to grieving and the trauma that's come because of this loss that we've experienced, and because it's been so long too, that different family members are kind of in different places. So there's some family members that, like for my mom, for example, she's kind of like, okay, well, I had to be the executor and I had to plan the funeral and, find the lawyer, and like, her grieving was really put on pause. And now she's like really starting to process it. And almost the same thing with Steven's dad. So I think that we're all in different places. I mean, ultimately, justice for Steven would mean that this person went to jail. But at the same time, it's like, what's ever enough for losing a family member? I think mostly it's like putting the word out there that this happens often, kind of like what you mentioned before. And maybe if we knew better back then, we would have been able to handle things differently. But, as an immigrant family, that is really difficult to know how to navigate these things. We've never been through something like this before. So I think more than anything, it's awareness for other families, advocacy, but I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of things that are out of my family's control. And I told myself that after meeting with Cold Case, that if I met with them and it didn't work out, that I knew that in my lifetime that I tried my hardest. And then I met with Cold Case and it didn't work out, and then I didn't stop. So, at this point, I don't know if it's ever going to work out for me and my family. But if, Steven's death can be utilized to help other families speak up for these injustices or these cases that just are rushed through, then I think that will be able to help me heal a little bit better.
Today, more than 20 years have passed since Steven Cornejo lost his life. His family continues to advocate in his memory. While the legal proceedings have long since concluded, Jessica's commitment to Steven's story has never wavered. In recent years, she has continued reviewing records, connecting with advocates, and working to ensure that Steven's story is not forgotten. For Jessica, advocacy isn't just about looking back. It's about honoring Steven's life. It's about keeping his memory alive. And it's about helping other families understand that they have a voice, even when the road ahead feels overwhelming.
If I could say anything to Steven, I'd say thank you for all the beautiful memories. Thank you for being my protector, for loving me like a sister. He was so affectionate that like you could feel the love, like how much he loved you, just radiating off of him, like hugs and kisses. And I often think, where would Steven be right now? And I picture him like he was always amazing with kids. So I knew that he'd be married and he'd have children. And unfortunately, his life was cut short at 23 years old. But I know that there was a reason that God put him here for 23 years. And he's, I want to thank him for just being a positive role model for me. now, I got some thick skin from being raised with all these boys, with the wrestling moves and everything that we used to do together. I just want to tell him that I miss him. I think about him all the time. And actually, I can tell like a quick story. My uncle, Steven's dad, one time he called me and he said, I need to come see you right away. And I was like, oh my God, am I in trouble right now? Because, your aunts and uncles, that you can get in trouble with them too, not just your parents in a Hispanic family. So, and he's also my godfather. So I was like, oh man, what did I do? And so he came over. He drove, at the time he lived like an hour and a half away from me. And he drove to see me. And he said, were you crying about Steven last night? And I said, yeah, actually I did cry myself to sleep. And this is maybe a year after he passed away. And my uncle said, okay, well, Steven came to me in my dream last night. And he told me to tell Jessica to please stop crying, that I'm happy where I am. And like, I got goosebumps because I legit had cried myself to sleep the night before. And my uncle said, and he also mentioned grandma, you and grandma. And my grandma passed away two years ago. So I know her and Steven are together now. But, his next stop was to tell my grandma, because my grandma took his passing really hard. But just the fact to know that he's watching me and he's created this belief system in me where, like, I know that our loved ones are watching over us and protecting us. And that, whenever our time comes, they're going to be the first ones that greet us.
If you'd like to learn more about Steven's story or follow the family's ongoing advocacy efforts, be sure to visit the Facebook page created in Steven's memory. I'll include a direct link in the show notes below. The page serves as a place to share updates, remember Steven, and connect with others who continue supporting the family's efforts to keep his story alive. And if there's one thing Jessica hopes people take away from Steven's story, it's that he was so much more than the circumstances surrounding his death. He was a son, a cousin, a friend, a protector, and he still is deeply missed by those who loved him. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Case Uncovered. It's so good to be back. And if you'd like to hear more cases like Steven's every week, please make sure you're following or subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you've been listening for a while, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Leaving a 5-star rating and review is one of the best ways you can support the show. Case Uncovered is an independent podcast, and every rating and review helps these stories reach more people. And you never know, it could reach someone who knows something about the case. To keep up with the advocacy work I'm doing through my 501c3 nonprofit organization, the Reignited Project, or to find ways to get involved, you can visit thereignitedproject.com. You can also connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube at Jen Rivera Investigates. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for taking the time to listen to Steven's story. I also want to take a moment to thank Jessica and Dave for working with me to bring you Steven's story today. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there.